Is there, we always talk about like the scientific method, right? And I'm just a crazy fiction writer, so I'm not going to have this down perfectly, but it's basically like the hypothesis, then you prove it, you gather data
Yeah,
and prove or disprove it.
right.
Um, is that methodology, like, is that sometimes handicapped when you try to look for something as grand as and elusive, perhaps, as a Sasquatch?
It can be because that textbook description of the scientific method has its place, and obviously that place is in experimental science, like if in
Hmm.
this case experimental
Sure.
biology, where you then identify a hypothesis that lends itself to testing. Now, so some people say if you can't experiment, if you can't test it, then it's not a scientific observation. But that's not right. There are also descriptive sciences, especially like seeing with my exposure and background upbringing in like paleontology, for example,
Sure.
historical sciences. You can't go out and experiment per se on a population of fossils. They're
Sure.
static, and they
Uh-huh.
capture their snapshot in time. Now there are inferences you can draw, and you can set up experiments by analogy or comparative anatomy, comparative functional morphology, to test the relationships, the cause and effect relationships that may lie beneath the correlations that you observe from your descriptions and observational. So many frontier sciences that are involved in new discoveries are more descriptive in their initial stages. You're observing something novel, something new. I mean, here are footprints that have never been documented before, and of a creature that hasn't been recognized by science. So the first step is to accumulate, to collect, and carefully describe and archive these specimens. And then you start looking for patterns. And then
Hmm.
you can test your inferential, deductions based on comparisons to other living analogs that shed further light on the relationships that you're trying to better understand or to propose. And so, um, yeah, we get some flack for that in
Hmm.
cryptozoology, for
Sure.
that it's not
Well,
science, it's a
right.
pseudoscience. I
Sure.
don't think that
Well, it
that
strikes me of what was that phenomenon? It's recognized now, but pilots kept saying they were seeing lightning like shooting up from the clouds. I forget,
Oh yeah.
and they
I
kept
don't know
saying
what the
that wasn't
phenomenon, how
real.
it's what it's called, but yeah, no, I've seen
Yeah.
some beautiful
Right. And
shots
then finally
from
they
high
went,
altitude.
okay,
It's just,
this
yeah,
is real.
it's
Yeah.
amazing to see. Yeah,
Right.
we just never
But
would have known because you can't see up through the clouds until you get
right,
gain
right,
that
right.
perspective. You see those
Uh-huh.
flashes up there,
Right.
these, and sometimes those were attributed to what I had never heard of it before. I was out east, this so-called sheet lightning, where
Sure.
the whole
Right.
sky just kind of, it's like a flash bulb going off rather than a discrete lightning bolt that's visible. And
Right.
yeah, the thunderclaps, I tell you,
Mm-hmm. Or like the
as many.
ball lightning. I've seen
I
a
haven't
video
seen
or
ball.
two
Yeah,
of
I've
ball
not had the
lightning.
privilege of seeing that. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and it's, I know it's recognized now, but it's still like if you see it, then it would feel very paranormal,
Sure.
right? In
Sure.
fact, actually, one time a friend and I were in the San Gabriel Mountains, or I live on the foothills of the San Gabriel Mountains here, so I don't know if you, I assume you've probably been to LA at some point, but if not, yeah. So the mountains, for anyone listening or watching, the mountains that you see whenever they show the Rose Parade or the Rose
Yeah.
Bowl, or sometimes they show LA, the towers, and there's some mountains with snow. Those mountains don't get snow that often, but occasionally they
Yeah.
do. That's the mountain. Deeper in the mountains does commonly, but the mountains are the foothills not so often. But we were there. We were younger, me and my buddy. In this case, we were out there, drinking out in the woods, and we saw this red kind of. I've heard people call them orbs and things, but it kind of
Yeah.
moved. And then I think I've heard recently that they started to realize, because there's all kinds of faults out here, right? So where the big one is. And they think
Ah,
that where the faults rub against each other, it might be releasing some energy that sometimes
interesting.
has a color to it. So it, I think the paranormal right? And I'm not a materialist by thought. I'm not real religious, but I do believe that we have a soul. There's a lot more than what's just
Hmm.
tangible. But I think a lot of what's paranormal that we say is paranormal, we realize is a very normal thing, and it's
Right.
just it was so outside of our frame of thinking that yeah,
Yeah.
this hairy man, 8 9 8 feet tall man seems paranormal until
Right.
you realize yeah, silverback, were seen paranormal and not
Right.
real for a long time
Right.
as
Right.
well.
Yeah. Yeah. Or you have to a jaw from East China or Vietnam that is the proverbial 800-pound gorilla. It's a gigantic ape that no longer
Uh-huh.
exists, and people
Uh,
would have called you crazy had they not found that handful of fossils to actually demonstrate they existed. So
yeah, sure.
yeah, it's kind of a fluid dynamic, I guess, as to what we consider normal or
Uh-huh.
conventional
Okay.
versus not, and it's rather time sensitive, time dependent.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you were given a budget, right? Like I mean, no one's going to give you $1 billion to go investigate Sasquatch, right? But whatever, like a reasonable but large budget would be to actually go out and do the science that you think would be necessary to be able to prove its
Mhm.
existence. So you have kind of the proverbial blank check, right?
Right.
What would that look like? How would you go about trying to do that?
Right. Well, after having spent, a couple decades doing all sorts of applying all sorts of methods to the question in the field and in the laboratory, I think right now the position that we're at is um, the recognition that if these creatures exist, they are probably very closely related to us. Gigantopithecus is one model, but there's no reason it couldn't also be an enlarged, hypertrophied form of an early bipedal hominin like a robust Australopithecine. So it would actually be on this side of the fence, dividing
Mm-hmm.
apes, ancestors and relatives, and human ancestors and relatives. And so, in which case, if we can look to the sequencing of the chimpanzee genome, and you'll see, depending on what part is actually being scrutinized, values anywhere from 96 to 98% identical to human. This creature may share 99, 99.5, 99.7% identity with us. And so one of the challenges that we've encountered is when DNA has been extracted from samples allegedly attributable to Sasquatch, on those occasions when they have been successful at extracting DNA, invariably it's come back as human. And the
Uh-huh.
conclusion is that it was either contaminated through handling by the witnesses or whatever, or it's just simply a human hair because, for example, if it's hair, a human hair that has been misattributed to possibly to Sasquatch. But the third possibility, and I think there's actually a fourth, but it's kind of getting off in the weeds. The third is simply you haven't sequenced enough. I mean, because most of these studies that are done like for a TV documentary, they have a limited budget. They have a
Mm-hmm.
limited commitment and it might be a commercial lab or it might be an academic lab, but they usually do just a very paltry sequence. And if only a modest sequence is done, what's it going to match? It's going to match human.
Sure. Sure.
And there is no Sasquatch in there to give you a competing outcome along with
Uh-huh.
human. And so it's probably going to have a portion of the DNA that is just indistinguishable from human variation. And so if I had an unlimited budget, we
Mm-hmm.
keep getting samples of hair that morphologically are primate. They appear to be non-human. They're grown to length, having never been cut. There are some distinguishing characteristics, but which are remarkably consistent across all these independently collected samples from Alaska to East Texas. And uh, I think with enough money to finance a thorough, conclusive exhaustive sequence, a genomic sequence, a genomic analysis at least, then we might be able to say with greater confidence whether or not that sample is attributable to Sasquatch. And it should be noted that there is no precedent for recognizing a new novel species on the basis of DNA sequence alone. So that result in and of itself, without having a known sample against which to compare it, would still be somewhat tentative, but still we could plug it in to a phylogenetic analysis and see where it falls on the family tree. And then we could say, is this closely related? Well, we can only bracket in a very broad sense. We have genomes of chimpanzees and gorillas and orangutans and so forth, but we don't have DNA from Gigantopithecus. We don't have DNA from any other hominin except, as far as I know.
Extra shots. Thanks so much, everybody, for tuning in. It was a lovely time, as always, and we appreciate your time. So thanks so much for being here. I am going to leave you with a couple announcements. One is that I am really excited to announce, if you've heard on the show, I've been talking about my epic absurdist satire, Pirates of Appalachia, for some time. It truly is epic. It's going to be 2 books, and I'm going to be releasing those in all book forms, but also as a serial on Substack. So if you head over to Substack, I'll have the link perhaps on the screen, perhaps just in the description in the pinned comment. But if you head over there, you'll be able to follow along chapter by chapter. I will be releasing the whole book. If you want to sign up to support me, support the show, I am going to have some extra content on there. I actually always have all these notes in my work that go to my editor, so that if he thinks to change something, it says this is how it plays out later. This is where I did the research, whatever stupid little joke I make to myself. Mainly, I'll have on there. I'm going to have a lot of fun little bonus content on there as well. And I'm going to do a bunch of readings. So that will be on there for the paid customers. But if you want it free, you will get the whole thing free as well. Both books will be on there, and I'll have ordering links. Right now, they'll probably be pre-order. Depending on when you watch this, maybe it'll be the regular order, but you'll be able to get the entire book too if you want to skip ahead and read the whole thing and read it on your e-reader, or read a paperback or a hardcover version. Whatever you would like. I'm trying to meet you where you are. I mean, you can meet me where I am, and that's the bar, usually, and predominantly Monday through Thursday. On the weekends, I drink at home. So, but if you would check that out, certainly I would really appreciate it. Also, we do have a member section on the YouTube if you'd like to go on there and get all the shows way early. And I'm going to start doing some monthly live streams for the members as well. Anyways, thanks so much for all your support, everybody. Cheers.